I'll tell you what, I was not expecting this, but the source code for Windows XP has been leaked. Now, I had heard about this, but the topic was suggested by a comment, Gum Skylord. So yes, I do actually read the comments and suggestions, but this is a definitely important topic that I thought you guys should know about. So basically, the source code to not just Windows XP, but also Windows Server 2003 were leaked onto 4chan on September 24th. And at first, a lot of people weren't sure if it was legitimate. It looked kind of legitimate, but eventually it was confirmed when at least one user, NTDev on YouTube, was able to compile Windows XP from the source code. So it was basically confirmed to be working, although there were a couple missing pieces I guess you had to add after compiling, such as winlogon.exe. And also the specific version was Windows XP Service Pack 1, so not 2 or 3. And the way it was released was not with any kind of fanfare. It was kind of quiet. There was actually a thread going on 4chan where people were talking about existing leaks of older other source code versions of Windows, and someone just as a reply basically said, hey, you didn't even know that the Windows XP one exists, and they leaked it right there. They posted a link to the file, and it was just in reply to the thread. It didn't even get its own thread. Now, I've seen some articles saying that the leaked source code and all the documentation was 40 gigabytes in size, but that's not really true. So the original archive link that the person posted initially was only about 3 gigabytes in size. However, it was re-uploaded to be part of the existing collection of Windows XP source code leaks from previous versions too, and all of those together were 40 gigabytes. And on top of that, the rest of the collection of Windows XP source files and stuff also had weird Bill Gates conspiracy videos and stuff in there too. I don't know, it's kind of weird, but just know that the new part was only about 3 gigs. Now, of course, I did end up downloading the Windows XP source code. I'm not gonna link to it or tell you how to download it. You're gonna have to figure that out yourself, because obviously it's still copyrighted by Microsoft. It would be illegal for me to try and tell you guys how to do and distribute it, I think. But I'll still show you some examples of some stuff inside. It's actually pretty cool. So basically, if you look inside the top directory, there's a bunch of different folders, and I'm not going to pretend to know what any of these are really for. I mean, it's an entire operating system, so they probably had a certain architecture of names and stuff they had, and then you can see that there's tons and tons of subdirectories within each folder. And if you dig down deep enough into each directory, eventually you'll get to source code files, and most of these are C or C++ source code files, which makes sense. Windows is basically written entirely in C, as you can see here. And unless you're a programmer yourself, most of this is probably not going to be anything groundbreaking, but there is actually some interesting cool stuff for the rest of us that we can check out. For example, there are some confidential, apparently, PowerPoints in here, including one about RCML, which seems to be some kind of, I don't know, XML-based file system. I don't really know what it's about, but it's kind of cool that it was confidential, but it's not anymore. I mean, this stuff is so ancient, it's probably not even secret at this point. But also, if you search for PowerPoints, there's actually plenty of other PowerPoint presentations. Some of them are just one slide long, showing system architectures and how things are organized within the Windows operating system. It looks like, stuff like that. And there's even some really funny stuff like just test.powerpoint, where someone just kind of pounded on the keyboard, apparently. And then there's also in that folder lots of other random test files they made, for example, an Excel test text file, stuff like that. So just a bunch of junk in there, along with the actual source code for Windows. And of course, because this is the source code for everything in Windows XP, there are some source codes to programs and features that you're probably familiar with, and this may allow people to create their own versions of it. For example, if we go into the shell, OS shell accessory folder, and I don't know if accessory is spelled incorrectly there on purpose. Anyway, you can see the source code for stuff like MS Paint. There's Notepad, which looks like it was written in C. There's the calculator, and actually stuff like Notepad, I mean, this looks like it was a lot more code than I anticipated, considering how simple Notepad is, especially back in Windows XP. So if you're interested in programming and you're like, I wonder how Notepad was written, well, or MS Paint, you can kind of go in and maybe look and learn right from the source code of these programs. And again, if you really wanted to get fancy, you could maybe modify it or make some changes and then compile it yourself, and then just learn that way just from doing. And of course, there's been plenty of people looking for very interesting stuff that they might be able to find deep within these archives. Of course, people have been doing searches for some naughty words, but most of this hasn't turned up anything except in some dictionary files, where of course it's going to have every kind of swear word as well. But you might be still wondering, is this going to have any kind of real consequences? Is there anything Microsoft is really going to do about this? And I think the answer is, well, not really. I mean, Windows XP is basically an ancient operating system that came out in 2001, and and this is the Service Pack 1 version of it. So a lot of the patches came out after that anyway, so there might be bugs in here that are no longer even in versions of Windows XP people are still using, because by that time they probably have Service Pack 3. And also important is support for Windows XP stopped back in 2014. So Microsoft has not been publishing security updates in a very long time, and they've been saying basically, if you're still using this, you're kind of on your own. But that doesn't mean that there aren't still plenty of computers running Windows XP somehow still. I think at the moment it has like a 0.82% market share, which isn't much, but still out of billions of computers, that does add up. A lot of these are maybe government organizations or big corporations that are running system critical software that is also ancient, just on these ancient computers, and they figure, you know what, this software we're using, there's not really an updated version of it. It only runs on old versions of Windows like XP, so they can't really upgrade unless they were to completely retool their entire servers and stuff to use a new version of the software or replace it, and then that would require retooling, all sorts of stuff connecting to it. But basically, a lot of these computers that are still using XP are doing so because it would be extremely difficult to replace them. And hopefully this should cause extreme pressure on any organizations still using Windows XP. And if you're someone who's using it on your personal computer, my God, please upgrade. If there's no other thing that will convince you to upgrade from Windows XP, it's that the source code was released, and now hackers are gonna have a field day trying to, just out of curiosity, just out of interest, look through the source code. And it's just a matter of time before they may find some exploits that exist in Windows XP that don't exist in any other version. So they're just gonna target people who are still using ancient computers, and that's gonna be you. Another possible consequence is if there are bugs that do exist in Windows XP Service Pack 1 that still exist somehow into Windows 10, then possibly hackers will find that, but I think that's probably unlikely. I mean, Windows gets patched all the time. Microsoft is constantly looking for bugs, but it also could give some hackers clues at least on how the Windows structure is, and maybe how some of that structure does continue into XP, through XP into 10, and then maybe gives them an idea of how to look for exploits, something like that, I don't know. Now granted, a lot of these computers that are still running critical applications on Windows XP are probably not exactly connected directly to the internet. They're probably just running local processes and stuff, so they are going to be behind a firewall. But at this point now, you will be completely dependent on that firewall. If anyone gets a Trojan into your network or something, it'll be extremely vulnerable, even more so than your other devices. So yeah, this should just be more of a kick in the pants for people to upgrade and replace stuff. Now realistically though, is there anything major going to happen now that this occurred? Probably not. I think probably this is just going to be good for people who are hobbyists. Maybe they want to compile their own version of Windows XP, because even in the security side of things, this is only a leak of Service Pack 1. So if there are any bugs found in here, they may have been found and already patched in Service Pack 3. And if there are any ancient computers still running XP, they probably do have Service Pack 3 for it. But another thing to remember is even if people do start compiling their own custom versions of Windows XP, first, it's going to be insecure probably because it's, you know, XP, but also it wouldn't be really easy to distribute it because Windows XP and all the source code is still copyrighted by Microsoft. So even if someone made it, they wouldn't be able to distribute it anywhere. So it's probably not something that's really going to take off. It would be illegal to post it on websites. So I don't really see this being too much of a huge issue, besides just being a curiosity in my opinion. So yeah, not much more to say about it. If you guys want to keep watching though, the next video I recommend is talking about the new version of Android 11. I talked about the new biggest features in that video. You can check it out right there by clicking on it. So thanks so much for watching guys, and I'll see you in the next video.